It's like a modern piece of classical work where, you know, if you take Holst's Planets, Townsend has created a classical songbook for the period of his life.
And I think to have melodies coming back in and lyrics being repeated, I think it works because it helps the story have a thread.
When it was released, it was before pre-punk rock. It's quite proggy. It's quite prog rocky, actually. It's, you know, it's got the sort of raw beating heart of the Who.
The thing about Quadrophenia is it isn't about goblins and fairies and toadstools and all the other stuff that seemed to be the prog rock was on about, and castles, and it's very down to earth. Also, yeah, it's like a kind of a realistic documentary.
It's too bombastic, you know, it's meant to be this mod thing, it's just too bombastic, you know. But that's what the Who were, they were this stadium arena band, weren't they? They had to make their music bombastic to reach, you know, Dave from Philadelphia about 2 miles away in the last row, you know. But I just thought it'd been really interesting to hear the Who in 1974 trying to play like the Who in 1964.
I don't think the contemporary sound of Quadrophenia was a strange juxtaposition, but because to tell a story and to tell a concept, you have to kind of tap into the emotions, and that was just, you know, a rock orchestral masterpiece. You would never have been able to tell that story in terms of My Generation or Substitute. It needed to actually have, you know, a more complex sound and emotion to it, and you know, its use of synthesizers on songs like Love Reign Over Me give it, you know, it really tap into some kind of, gives it a real emotional clarity. And I don't think in terms of the kind of songs that Townsend had been writing when he was 25, he'd have been able to do that.
The complexity of the music reflected the complex nature of the central character Jimmy and the struggle that he was going through. This was no more apparent than in the lead song on the album, The Real Me, in which Jimmy is confronting the 4 personalities that he is battling.
Brilliant opener, exciting. They still play it live now and it sounds fantastic. Some of the best bass playing you'll ever hear. And it sets out the themes for the album and the feeling of alienation very early on.
It's got all that fury 10 years later, but because they're so proficient by that time, it's a sort of controlled fury.
Townsend understood teen angst. He always did. He understood it in My Generation, but when he was a 30-something looking back in Quadrophenia, he was writing a really well, it was a really well-defined portrait of a young kid and the problems he was going through. You know, you could tell that bloke actually understood what was happening.
He could only see it from his point of view, and he's seen young kids coming to his concerts. They're all dressed up, they're riding scooters. He's seen the aggression that those teenagers had. He's obviously propelled it himself with smashing guitars, and I think he's got as good a description as anyone could have from that period.
Townsend's proficiency with writing about youth culture and identity only spurred on the teenage listeners of the album in the 1970s. And this was very apparent in Quadrophenia's main character, who, unhappy with his own life, looks for things to rebel against and finds that the mod movement provides an identity which he craves.
I think in the album that Jimmy is rebelling against everything that he can contemplate. So that's his family, his school, and he leaves school after seeing the Who at Hammersmith. And then he gets a job for one day, he rebels against that. He rebels against all the people who are too afraid to rebel at work. He rebels against society generally, and that's probably what most 16 or 17-year-olds are feeling like.
Why should I care if I have to cut my hair? I got to move with the fashion or be outcast.
Yeah, it's kind of, you know, you feel alienated just because you want to be yourself. You know, you want to tread your own, you know, walk your own path and do what you do. And you can see that in Cut My Hair, it goes a bit more into not so much its peers as well as like, you know, parents. It's kind of like feeling you want to fit in, but you want to be yourself as well.
The major part of mod was about attention to detail. You always had to be better than the rest. You wanted to be, it was one-upmanship. And as contrived as it sounds, that's the way the whole thing works and still works to this day. You go out and you have a suit made and you've got a 1-inch split on your side seams and a covered button. Well, someone else is going to say, right, I'm going to have 2 buttons and a 2-inch split. And then someone's going to come back, I'm going to have an extra split on my cuff. It's that whole competition. And it's all about striving to be the best that you can be.
Sorry, but have I got to wait here all day while you two finish a conversation? I'm wearing it down to Brighton.
You're going to be one of the faces down there, are you?
What do you mean, going to be? I am one of the faces.
I liked Townsend's lyrical closeness to Mod and his understanding, and the fact that he could fill that album and that song in particular with Mod references that would mods would understand and tap into. But I think that what's great about that song is just the feeling of it, you know, the pure emotional feeling, and that's possibly one of the, you know, the success of the whole album.
Suit, suit, white jacket with side rims, 5 inches long. I'm out on the street again, and I'm leaping along.
With quite a lot of the songs on the album, they're about identity. You know, the songs about identity, finding an identity, being part of a mob, being part of the gang. I think that, you know, that song could apply, as with most of the album, to not just mods. It could be skinheads. It's about youth tribes, about finding an identity, having your own identity in the crowd.
Were you and your friends mods or rockers?
Well, we're mods when we're dressed up, you know.
You are
Mods.
What caused all this trouble yesterday?
Boredom.
On whose part?
Well, on both.
What happened?
Well, there was lots of things, you know. They started, you know what rockers are like, don't you?
I think there's always been a desire for youth to associate with like-minded kids, to find security in a group identity, and mod, I think, was no different from anything else.
Also significant to the identity of the album was the accompanying booklet. A key component for many listeners, it featured a series of stark black and white photographs depicting the narrative of the music, along with the story of Jimmy Cooper, which provided extra detail.
The booklet has 2 important points. It has the essay at the beginning, which sets out the story, if you can't follow it from the music alone. And it's got the photographs. And the photographs are very important because they show a London and a Brighton as it was in the 60s.
It actually, I think, was shot in the early 70s anyway, obviously, you know, going back in it. But it was a dilapidated part of South London, which we were kind of from anyway. It just seemed to fit in the streets I was walking around in. So, whether it was meant to be set in 63, 65, it was 1973, that's where I was coming into it. I just felt it was at that particular time. So to me, it was kind of like, that's what mob was then. If 65 was still like how I felt in 73. So it was perfect, totally perfect.
We'd got some kids that lived in the street, in the council flats by Ramport Studio in Thessaly Road, Battersea. And the kid that they'd already chosen this kid, Chad, to be the main guy in the booklet. Jimmy, I suppose. And he was brilliant. I thought he looked so mod. He was great. And then some of the girls we dressed up. And I got Pete's brother, Paul, who looks a bit like a young Pete. And we put him in a seersucker jacket and stuff. So we did all that sort of thing. But Ethan Russell taking these pictures.
I think that's Townsend arriving at the decision to make a film. I think Townsend was looking at the visual aspect of his work even then, even back in the early 70s, long before he conceived of making a film. I don't know whether this rock opera was written with a film in mind. I think it probably wasn't. But if you look at the narrative, the visual narrative that goes with it, it adds to the experience. And for example, Buddy Ascot, who's the drummer of the Chords, who was a band that I followed in '79, I'll never forget him telling me that he got into being a mod through sitting down and reading that booklet and seeing it and going, wow, I want to be like that.
And Quadrophenia, for me, is the epitome of the album packaging matching the music and being almost as important. And when I bought the album, it was a way of, it was like a guide to life, how to dress, where to go. It was as important as the music.
Where do you get those blue jeans? Faded, packed secrets so tight.
Keeping in tune with the biographical starting point to the album, Townsend decided that he wanted the central mod character to reflect the different personalities of each member of The Who. They kind of captured that on the album cover as well, with the four faces in the mirror on the scooter. He's summing up Mod in terms of the personalities of the four members of the band in a way that connects both the original concept of the album as a piece about the origins of The Who with the people that followed them, with the mods. He kind of connected the two.
There's personality in most of those songs that can be adapted to each member of The Who. I think there is each member of The Who has a little piece of a song, Roger's bit or Pete's bit or John's bit.
Helpless Dancer, which is Roger's theme, I think that was given to him because it's just rage and incomprehension at the world. And I think Roger at that time was prone to letting his fists do the talking, and that song is really quite violent in its outlook on life. Bellboy, obviously for Keith, gives him a chance to sing. I say sing, vocalise is probably better. Dr. Jimmy, which is John's theme, has got a very dark side to it, especially lyrically. And I think John was seen as the slightly sinister member of the band, not just the skeleton suits that he used to wear, but he had a macabre, dark sense of humour, so that was his. Pete's theme, Love Reign Over Me, ends the album, and I think that's his philosophy in life. Well, I hope it is.
I think all those four elements make up Jimmy Cooper, and they make up that album as well.
Helpless Dancer's aggressive nature not only reflected Daltrey's persona, but also offered a contemporary look at 1970s society.
I think the track Helpless Dancer was probably written after watching the news one night, because it seems to be Pete just raging about everything. He doesn't understand what's happening, he's angry about it, he's frustrated, and the character Jimmy is just unable to articulate himself or comprehend what is happening to the world. And it's talking about racism and industrial strife. It's addressing things that were very important in '73 in Britain, and are probably becoming important again.
And there was the power cuts, there was all these sort of things going on that are around you which were relevant. I mean, I remember trying to get to school and do bus strikes and stuff like that, so it was kind of a 3-day week. You got to be at school 3 days, which was fantastic. So I would look at it fond memories, but I don't think people of a certain age would do.
When a man is running from his boss who holds a gun that fires cost, and people die from being old or left alone because they're cold, and bombs are dropped on fighting cats, and children's dreams are run with rats. If you can play, you disappear, just like the lesbians and queers.
The song is framed. It may be ostensibly about Mr. Daltrey, but really it's Townsend railing about the unfairness of British society for working class kids, the limited scope for opportunities, you know, the boss squashing like this, the gun that fires cost. And it's great. It's as angry as, it's more punk than anything that came out of punk. It says it all. It says everything that the Clash wanted to say in 3-4 minutes. And it's as angry as the bands that came a few years later, who were half, maybe 2/3 their age or something, or 10, 12 years younger.